so fun to watch. And especially Valor, he's got the eye of the tiger. Like, and I told him I'd give him $1 per goal he scored. It was awesome. He was on fire, like on fire, and he's already kind of on fire. And so he scored his first goal, and kind of like played it cool, like purposely didn't make eye contact with me for a while. Kind of like backpedaled real cool to the the reset line, and the half in basketball is a half court. I don't know what's called soccer. Midfield, backpedals back, and then he like real cool. He kind of looks over at me. He's like, "You see that, Dad? Like, you owe me $1. You owe me $1." And then seconds winding down, he scored another goal right before the game ended. And man, he knew those $2 were coming. He was so amped. It was hilarious. Yeah, he was so motivated. I thought, I don't know if this is good or bad. Should parents motivate their kids to score with money? And I thought, they really should. I've tried hard to teach my kids their whole life that it really is about winning. And everyone, there's this giant lie. It's about having fun, but every kid knows that it's only fun if you win. So I just, they get confused with this stuff. They're like, no, just have fun. They're like, well, losing's lame. I'm like, yeah, it's because it really is about winning. So get out there and win, son. And I'll pay you if you do. And he did. He did. They won 3-0, and he had 2 of the goals. Anyway, he's so funny. He's got this little competitive drive in him, which makes me so proud. I'm like feeding him. And last soccer season, he was in the younger one even, and he dominated every game. He scored like almost at will. And he would get out on the field and just like eye of the tiger, forget there was anyone else around, grab the ball, dominate all the way down the field and score. And he just got this like throughout the season this like swag. He knew he could win. So the last game of the year, he gets out there, first little bit, scores 2 goals immediately. Other team scores a couple, and then he scores a couple more. And the coach pulls him out, and the coach is great. He goes, "Hey, we gotta be fair. We gotta let all the other kids, have some fame and some fun as well." Which I was laughing. And so Valor's sitting on the bench, and we're up by like 2 or 3 goals because he had scored quite a few. And he's the only one on the bench, and I'm sitting next to him, and he doesn't know I can like hear him. He's kind of mumbling under his breath. And the other team scores 1 goal, and then they score another goal, and then they're tied, and then they score another goal. And they're up by 1, and he's sitting there, and he's looking, and under his breath, he goes, "Man, coach needs to put me back in." And I was like, yes! It's in him, he's got it! He's got that competitive edge, so literally, no lie. One of the other kids gets hurt, and he's like, "Valor, I need you to go in." And he didn't even wait for the end of his name. Like, he's already running off the bench into the field. Gets the ball and immediately scores. I was so proud. It's like my other kids, they're into different things. Asher is super into music, which is amazing. I'm highly encouraging it because it's like if you played high school sports, then you had this like glory run through high school. And then if you've been out of high school a few years, you're like, yeah, that didn't really take you too far outside of high school. Right? But then there's guys in their 40s and they're still crushing like the piano or their guitar or whatever, and you're like, I should have paid more attention to music when I was in high school. It was all about, buckets when I was in high school, but now those buckets aren't getting me anywhere, So I'm highly encouraging music too, because it lasts a little bit longer than buckets do, as much as I love buckets. So, but Valor's the first one in my family who's got the competitive sports drive, and I am so amped about it. So I'm paying for it. I'm, whatever it takes to just keep that inside of him. It's fun. You guys are gonna love parenting that aren't parents yet. It is so much fun. All right. Woo! It's Friday. It feels like Friday. Here we go. We're gonna jump into, and my goal to this morning, we'll just see where it goes, is I want to personalize everything we've talked about, and we have at different times. We personalized grit yesterday and endurance, and we've done that throughout the last couple of days, but I really want to draw it down to what is God doing in our individual lives, or what does He need to do, what has He done, is doing, will continue to do, to essentially create in us, I don't know what else to call it, but like a spirit of revival. Like where we carry this through the ups and downs of life. We carry this through the exciting and the mundane moments of life. We carry this through seasons of singleness and being married and family, and that we don't. This isn't something that we look back on and go, there was a couple years in my life that I was really on fire, right? We don't look back and go, there's a couple years that I really burnt, like I was burning on the inside, or gosh, remember when we used to talk about what God could do in our cities and towns and nations, and the goal is that we would never look back on a season of life and reflect like that, because we're more on fire in the next season than we were in the previous season. So what I want to talk about today in light of all of this is that essentially, we drew out a bunch of conclusions already, but these guys, they didn't live this for a season. It wasn't a 1 or 2 year period. It wasn't a school they did. This consumed them. And you can look back on and go, they carried like a spirit of revival. It was like it gripped them. It was who they were. It consumed everything they did. Even in the midst of mundane life and normal days and normal life, they were still gripped with the cause that there's something greater going on. There's something bigger happening. And that even in our normal lives, we're tapping into that bigger thing. And so what I want to do today is personalize this a little bit, and I want to draw out 3 kind of conclusions that I think we can walk away with this morning as some areas that God really wants to develop depth in our lives in. And the first one I want to hit is, I don't know what sequence I'll hit them in, we'll see, but I want to hit the Word and how we really approach the Word. I want to talk both practically and kind of like, and I want us to carry faith and practical discipline in the Word. We're going to talk a little bit about prayer, and we're talking a little bit about integrity and holiness, kind of married together, holiness, integrity, character. And so the way we're going to go through this morning is I want to talk about what I think probably in the Bible and in history, the person that possibly saw some of the greatest, I don't know how to phrase this, saw some of the most astounding impact in the face of some of the worst odds without ever really having any written account of him having a major failure or a major character flaw. The only one I'm aware of, right? All these guys, awesome. I mean, some of them had I'm not aware of Hudson Taylor having really any character flaw, right? There are those that had massive impact. Some of them had kind of big flaws. Some of them had a few. But in my estimation, one of the most impacting people in human history living out a life of prayer, the Word, and integrity that I've ever been made aware of is the man Daniel in the Bible. And so I'm gonna pull out of the life of Daniel a little bit, and especially in biblical history, it's astounding when you're gonna be plowing through big chunks of Scripture, which is a big part of what's really fun about all this. And I'm doing that right now as well with you. And man, when you read about these guys, the heroes of the faith, is it not a little bit like interesting to dig into their lives and be like, that was crazy? Like Abraham's had some crazy business going on in the midst of being a father of the faith. Like when he 2 times essentially gives his wife away to other kings, I just want to slap him. I'm just like, hey, you're the father of the faith, but this is outrageous. What happened here? Do you have a mental lapse, right? Like major character flaw there, like major blind spot, major. Let's just say he was weak in those moments. He was a coward in those moments. But of course, he was a mega man of faith in other moments, right? But you see that across the board. David's one of our heroes. He had some pretty, mega things that you don't want to pattern your life after, right? You see that again and again. You see Joseph. He overcomes some amazing stuff, but I don't know, really the system that he created with Pharaoh, based on the revelation that God gave him, actually led to the enslavement of an entire nation. So you're sort of like, yeah, good, right, heart, wrong, bad idea. Like, way you fleshed it out, I don't know if that was the way that God wanted you to flesh it out, right? And you see that all the way through Scripture, except for Daniel. And you see it in the New Testament. You see it in Paul's life. He's at times it seems like he's got a little bit of temper. He breaks with John Mark. At the end of the story, Barnabas and Peter, seems like they hang with John Mark. John Mark comes around. At the very end of Paul's life, he recommends John Mark. So glad that those guys hung with John Mark. We wouldn't have the Gospel of Mark today, right? But even Peter was like a little bit impetuous, at times. Very much so. But when you read the life of Daniel, to me, it is the life in the Scripture that I have held up in God. God, if there is a life I most want to mimic other than Jesus himself, right? Obviously, it's the life of Daniel. And so I want to jump into his life a little bit and then jump into those 3 areas and categories that we're going to hit. How's that sound? You guys in for that today? Yeah. Heck yeah. Alright. How many of you feel like you haven't really ever dove too deep into the life of Daniel? I'm just curious. You're kind of like, okay, wow, really never dove into his life that much. Fun. Really haven't. Yeah. Rebecca. It's clear Rebecca. Rebecca has dove into the life of Daniel. Oh, no. So raise your hand if you haven't. I'm just curious. That you haven't read that much on the life of Daniel. Fun! You're going to get addicted to it. It's going to mess you up. Absolutely mess you up. Do we have someone that's going to kind of teach on that, David or Daniel? What's that? It'll be in the government week. We'll focus on life of Daniel. Very cool. Very cool. Oh, that'll be so fun. You can't over-focus on it. Because, like I said, he's the only one other than Jesus that I can actually point to in Scripture that it seems like his character lined up with the character of Jesus. It's remarkable. It's incredible. So I'm going to do an overview. So it'll be a little hard for you to maybe follow through. Follow me exactly. I'll try and give you chapter and verse of some of the references I'm going to hit, but it might be easier for you just to write them down. Or if you want to, follow me and underline them, whatever you want to do. But I'm going to start. What I want to do is I'm going to tell a little bit of his life, and then we're going to jump into some of these principles and values. Daniel chapter 1, you got to know that Daniel's a teenager. He's part of the last exile out of Judah and out of Jerusalem when Babylon comes and overthrows the Jerusalem and Judah. You have two major exiles. You have the exile of the 10 northern tribes of Israel, and the people that come to exile them are Syria. And then you have the second exile, which is the last two tribes, which is Judah and Benjamin in the south. And the ones that come and destroy them are Babylon. And so when the 10 tribes go into exile, they're exiled by the Assyrians. The Assyrians had an interesting tactic when they conquered a kingdom. To keep that kingdom from ever rising again, they disseminated them across their whole kingdom so that their culture could not be preserved. And so they could never rise again. So the 10 tribes, when they are captured in the northern kingdom, they are scattered across Assyria's kingdom. And we know very little about what happened to them because they were so scattered. They were unable to preserve their culture, whereas Babylon sought to enculturalize a kingdom that it conquered and actually allowed them to maintain their own culture a little bit to try and keep the peace, kind of brought them together. And so when Jerusalem and Judah and Benjamin are exiled by Babylon, many of them are brought into the city of Babylon itself. And Daniel would have been probably part of royal family who was growing up in the king's courts in Jerusalem before Babylon comes and destroys them. But because he's in the king's court, and because of Babylon's thinking, they bring Daniel into Babylon's courts. And they bring those kind of young, up-and-coming leaders, and they seek now to train them to be leaders within the Babylonian system. So that's Daniel, and that's the context of chapter 1. There's no real understanding of how old he is, but he's young. He's younger than anyone in here. He's probably in his mid-teens. He's probably 15, 16, somewhere like that. Daniel, when he's first exiled, he's a young man, which is astounding when you dive into the record of his life. So, that's chapter 1. Now, as we go through here, I'm just going to read you some descriptions of Daniel's life. Verse 4 says, of him and those with him, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. So this is what Daniel is described as, and his other kind of young leaders. Pretty remarkable. What's that? Yeah, he's a good-looking guy. He's a stud. I mean, no physical defect and handsome. That's every man's dream description. He's epitaph on our tombstones. No physical defect and handsome, right? But we keep dreaming. But that was Daniel's life, right? So that's what it says about him. But also showing aptitude. So as a young man, he had all the signs of the ability to learn. He had a keen ability to learn, well-informed. And these are all things that, I want to say none of these are things that any of us are disqualified from. In other words, these weren't just things that just were true of Daniel. These are things that every one of us can walk in. And I actually think it's a big part of what actually drew you guys to Revival and Reformation are some of these very same descriptions. Is that there was a desire to understand, there was an aptitude to understand, and meaning a propensity, and a desire to learn. And that was part of what Daniel was commended for. He was handsome and had the desire to learn, which really describes the majority of the men in this room. Yeah. Handsome and an aptitude to learn. And a lot of them are single, so that's good news for the ladies in here as well. I mean, there's just no greater place to meet your spouse than. Second time today? Did David already promote this? Yeah. Yeah. We had a saying in Maui way back in the day, you know, student was no, but staff, or second level course was go. It was just run hard, run fast. What better place to meet someone? All right, sorry if I put pressure on anyone and you're afraid to make eye contact now or sit next to someone of the opposite gender. and whatever you do, don't be the overly vigorous guy right now, because you'll scare the ladies away. So, you know, just play it cool. Keep playing it cool. Just wait for that moment. Yeah, wait for that opportunity. We had a moment, some of you guys may have heard me share this once, but Jeremy Curry was back here once recruiting for Nepal and missions in general, like real frontiers. And he was in the BTS. And he's wild. He just got wild on the guys. And he goes, some of you guys, I don't know why he said bathroom, but he did. He goes, some of you guys just need to go into the bathroom and break off passivity, find a wife, and move to the nations. Right? That's what he says, right? And unfortunately, this young lady, I don't know, you're probably not in here. I hope you're not, because if you are, none of us remember who it was you anyway. You're not. Is this young lady sitting in the front row. After he said that, I don't know if she thought maybe a lot of people would react, but nobody really did. It was kind of like, and she goes, yeah! Like all by herself. And she's like rejoicing, like emphatically that men would break off passivity, find a wife, and move to nations. And you can see all the guys were like, don't talk to her, don't make eye contact, and never sit with her again. Yeah! She was so excited that her breakthrough was coming because the breakthrough for the men was coming. And I'm pretty sure she never got a date. That's cool. That's cool. She was supposed to. She was in BTS. But anyway, that's just like, you know, play it cool, guys. Still play it cool. But it is a great place to meet your spouse. Okay. Where were we? Oh, yeah. Handsome, on fire, smart men. That's where we were. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 8, I'm going to come back to this, but it says, but Daniel resolved, and I'm going to come back to this word resolved. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And culturally, you got to understand, that was food and wine that was associated with idol worship. So it wasn't that there's something wrong with good food. It was that it was associated with idolatry. And this word right here, Daniel, he resolved to not defile himself. And I want you to just touch that for a moment. We'll circle back to it. Is that this is let's just say for the rest of our class this morning, let's just, for ease of thinking, he's 15. Which he could have been younger, he could have been older. But he wasn't much older, he probably wasn't much younger. So let's just say 15. 15-year-old. And you got to know, Israel, Jerusalem, was taken into captivity because they were idol worshippers. So in other words, Israel's not righteous when they are exiled. There's a few that are righteous. Very few. A couple prophets. Apparently Daniel, a young teenager, and maybe a few others. But the majority of Israel is in idol worship, and that's why they're judged and brought into exile. So that a 15-year-old has the wherewithal, now surrounded by darkness, because Babylon is a vile, idol-worshiping nation. Violent, sexual, idolatrous nation, Babylon is. He's surrounded by that. He's been given favor in the king's court. His people are mostly lost their way. And he has the ability to have a resolve in his heart to not defile himself at 15 years old. That setting. I'm telling you, something that was so unique about these men and women was resolve. And it was resolved for integrity. And I want to say that today, the temptation towards compromise is greater than any era in human history because of technology, which doesn't demonize technology. We're all about using it for the kingdom. But it has simply just put compromise closer to our eyes and fingertips than it ever was for any previous generation. It's just standing at the door. It's just right there. And I don't mean just in issues of purity. I mean in issues of gossip and slander and criticism, issues of judgment and comparison, which leads to all kinds of other things, as well as immorality or sexual immorality, right? It's a whole plethora of things. But what was unique about Daniel, what's unique about a generation that gets gripped by a spirit of revival is they resolve in their hearts not to compromise. There's a resolve, and you find that throughout history with these men and these women. I think John Wesley, I just so inspired reading about his life and his resolve for a no-compromise lifestyle. Because of everything we're doing at the Send, I just reread Keith Green's biography, No Compromise. Have any of you read that? Raise your hand if you've read No Compromise. Okay, wow, awesome. That just means you all get to read an amazing book. I read it on my honeymoon. Highly recommend it. And I just decided, man, I'm 20. When I got married, I am young. I need all the help I can get. And how about we build our marriage on a foundation of no compromise lifestyle? So I read the whole book on my honeymoon. Keith Green's an inspiring man. I reread it. I just finished it maybe a month ago or whenever. And so inspired by the resolve in Keith Green's life to a no compromise lifestyle, which led to a spiritual awakening that was quite remarkable in his time and his influence. Daniel was a man who resolved. We're going to come back to it because otherwise I'm going to get going too far. But I want you to remember that word and write it down, circle it, verse 8, chapter 1, resolved not to defile himself with royal food and wine. Skip me to verse 17. To these 4 young men, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Chapter 2, we get into Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon. And it says in verse 14 that Daniel spoke to the king with wisdom and tact. This is phenomenal. There's so many lessons in the life of Daniel. But Daniel had the grace and the ability, the humility, to be able to speak to demonic, idol-worshiping, immoral kings with wisdom and tact. Not with anger, not with frustration, not with like, you loser, but with wisdom and tact. So much so that there are 4 kings that rule in Daniel's life. Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Cyrus, and Darius. And what we'll see as we go through is that all 4 of them acknowledge that there is one true God, and it is the God of Daniel. And all 4 of them were idol-worshiping, demonically empowered kings before Daniel messed their lives up. So, it says that he spoke with wisdom and tact. Let's keep going. These are stories you've probably heard. These are some of our favorite Sunday school stories, right? Daniel, yep. Say it, anything.
Let me just make a comment that in Rev&Ref, our last 3 months are on communication. And in my view, this comment of wisdom and tact in communication is really important for us in our future. So that's one of the reasons why we have it.
I love that. Come on, David. Yes, that's so good. I remember being real challenged, don't make this political, but any political leader that's in office, it's amazing how critical we are. It really doesn't matter who it is, right? They take more criticism than anyone else. And I just remember being so challenged because we were praying for the president at that time, and we were praying God's, we pray that you pour out your spirit on his family. We pray for salvation of his heart and his whole family. We pray you keep their family together. You just bring blessings in life, right? In the midst of so much criticism. And I remember thinking to myself, how interesting it is that we're so critical, we're so quick to gossip, we're so quick to have really, really negative, strong opinions. But I thought to myself, I hope someday to stand before kings and presidents. I really do. And I would hate to stand before that president and know in my heart that I'm a hypocrite. Because what I'm about to say to them is different what I've said about them when they weren't there. And I would hate to stand in front of them and go, you know what? What I would love to do is be able to look them in the eye and go, hey, this isn't about agreeing on policies. I want you to know for years we've been praying for your family. Because you have a marriage, and we've just been praying Jesus would bless it. And you have children, we've been praying that God would pour out His Spirit on your children. And I don't know where you're at with God, but I've just been praying that you would know the love of God, that you would know the love of Jesus. And to be able to say that versus like to look them in the eye and know that in the backlog of my life are hours of a critical monologue that have gone on over their lives. Or hours of critical gossip that have gone on because I don't agree with someone. Listen, I don't need to agree with someone to love them. Come on. Love and agreement have never been equal. They've simply never been equal, right? And so Daniel had the ability to love without agreeing. Yeah. And he had the ability to agree without moving into the sin of criticism or gossip or slander, right? He had the ability, or to disagree, he could disagree with someone without moving in too far. And I want to say, perhaps this is more important for our generation than any generation in history. We are living in the most polarizing era, probably, of political history, not just in America, but internationally. You live in the UK right now, it is polarizing. Right? If you live in numerous nations in the world right now, it is polarizing, and a generation has never been discipled like Daniel, how to love and not equate that with having to agree. And then how to disagree with civility and honor and love, so that people like Nebuchadnezzar encounter God. Because Daniel had humility and the ability to communicate, the ability to love, right? It's so important we learn this, guys. That's a whole other lesson, whole other moment. But chapter 2, at the very end, verse 47, the king said to Daniel, this is in the midst of interpreting his dream, listen to this, listen to this. Surely your God is the God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and the revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. And the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all of its wise men. He's still, this is probably a few years down the road, he might be 18, 22, young man, full of aptitude to learn, wisdom, and tact, and he's now ruling Babylon as a slave refugee. This is the life of Daniel. It's so remarkable. Then it goes on, just in case you think Nebuchadnezzar was like, well, he probably just said that because he kind of knew God. The very next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar decides to make a giant idol that the whole world has to worship. And it's made an image of gold, 60 cubits high, 60 wide, set it up in the plain of Dur in the province of Babylon, summoned the satraps, all these people, to come to dedication of the image he had set up. So here he is calling the whole nation to idolatry. And so the journey's not over. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him. So you know the story. That's why I'm not telling the whole stories. But everyone's supposed to bow down. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego won't, which is remarkable. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But, and this is the best statement, even if he doesn't, we want you to know, majesty, that we will never serve your God or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Unbelievable! These men, young men, again, they've resolved in their hearts not to defile themselves. And they literally know, can you imagine this moment? Literally everyone has to bow down and you're the last one, so you're the only one standing. You're the only one standing. And they have reserved a furnace for you already. A furnace. It hurts. And then they're just standing there while everyone else bows down. They're brought before the king, and he goes, hey, I'm about to chuck you in the furnace if you don't bow down. And they go, hey, don't even bother blowing the trumpet because we'll never bow down to your rifle. And I almost picture their tone here being like really kind. Like, King Nebuchadnezzar. It's kind of like, you don't get it. Poor guy. Bless your heart. Oh, bless him. Just bless him. Nebby, you just don't get it. You just don't get it, do you? Like, hey, just so you know, our God, he can save us, but hey, even if he doesn't, we'll never bow down to your little cute little idol. Like, you know, it's just amazing, the maturity, the strength, right? Let's keep going. We know the story. The guys that go to throw him in the furnace die because it's so hot. And then it says in verse 25, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like the Son of God. Oh, verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar says, praise be to the God. There it is again. He's having a rededication moment. Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted him and defied the king's commands. They trusted him and defied the king's commands and were willing to give up their lives rather than to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces. Wow. What? This is violence. Violence, cut into pieces. Their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Oh, unbelievable. This is verse 28 to the end of chapter 3. And the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So you now have 4 young, early 20s, maybe late teens, maybe early mid-20s, rulers who are refugee slaves who are now ruling the nation. And and their king has proclaimed their God is the only God. Let's keep going. Now we're into Nebuchadnezzar's next dream. Nebuchadnezzar lived a bit of a roller coaster life. He had some ups and downs. Let's just say he was building his testimony. Verse 8, finally Daniel came into my presence. He has this other dream. He said, I told him the dream. It says they gave him another name. He is called Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't quite get it, but he gives him a name because he recognizes the spirit of God is in him. Shares the dream with him. It says in verse 18, this is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now, Belteshazzar, tell me what it means, for none of the wise men in my kingdom can interpret it for me. But you can, because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Daniel goes on to interpret the dream, and let's just say it's bad news, which again takes boldness and courage to be able to speak truth in love, even when it prophesies the king's future, and it's bleak and it's dark. It says in verse 34, at the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. The dream is fulfilled, which means he literally goes insane. He starts to live like an animal, eating grass and living literally in the fields with the animals for years. But then in verse 34, his sanity is restored. Then I praise, there it is again, then I praise the Most High, which is the first time he capitalizes his reference to the one true God. Before he said the spirit of the gods is in Daniel. Now he has revelation. The capital M, capital H, Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. Listen to this. This is the declaration of this king. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases. With the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth, no one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done? At that same time that my sanity was restored, my honor and splendor was returned to me. For the glory of my kingdom, my advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before. He went from an animal eating grass to the revelation of the one true God, restored to his kingdom. In verse 37, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Daniel. Chapter 5 begins the next king, his son, Belshazzar. You know this story. Belshazzar does not heed the wisdom of his father, which Daniel points out when he speaks to him. He's throwing a giant drunken party, and that's when a hand appears and writes on the wall. Do you remember this story? And it says in verse 12, he did this. He calls Daniel. They tell him, they go, your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed this guy Daniel, chief of the magicians, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding. There it is again. And he says, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. I love that statement. The people of the kingdom are going to be marked as those who can solve difficult problems. That's not a spiritual gift. That's a relationship with the Holy Spirit. That's available for all of us. Yes. Sorry. I am in verse 12 of chapter 5. Verse 12 and 13. Just 12. And then it says, call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. So Daniel's kind of been left alone. Belshazzar has this encounter. He needs definition. They go, hey, there's a guy in your kingdom that can actually help you explain it to you. His name is Belteshazzar. Your father leaned into him, and he goes, call for him. Daniel was brought before the king. This is verse 13. Are you Daniel, one of the exiles? So he's still known as a refugee. One of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah. I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. Wise men and enchanters were brought before him, blah, blah, blah. The rest of the story goes that Daniel interprets it. The interpretation, once again, is negative. And it says at the very end of that chapter, that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Daniel's prophecy, the prophecy of God, comes true. Darius is killed, and now, Belshazzar is killed, and Darius takes over the kingdom. Now we're in chapter 6, okay? Now, chapter 6 is the last chronological chapter of the book of Daniel. So this is the end of Daniel's life. Now, This is what's crazy. Please hang with me here for a second to let this really land in your hearts. We have traveled in those 6 chapters 66 years. 66 years from Daniel being in captivity, his interactions with Nebuchadnezzar, his interactions with Belshazzar, and now his interactions with Darius. He has been in exile for 66 years, which means if we said he was 15, then he's now 81 years old. Did I do the math right? 81 years old. So he's 15, he was 81. If he's 17, he's 83. Just so you get his idea. Let's just call him 80, okay? So Daniel is 80 years old in the beginning of chapter 6 now. He has been living in faithfulness and in integrity for 66 years in a kingdom of darkness whose rulers forget about the righteousness of the previous ruler who encountered God, and essentially starting over all the time. So now we get into chapter 6. You've got to know that when you head into chapter 6 because it changes the story. Chapter 6. Darius has appointed 120 rulers throughout the kingdom and 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. So Daniel is one of the 3 leaders over the entire nation, which is now no longer Babylon, because the way the empires went, and you'll learn all this through this time, is Assyria was the major superpower that conquered the 10 tribes. Babylon essentially pushed Assyria back. They conquered the 2 tribes, and they're the dominant force. And then it was the Persians that overthrew the Babylonians, and now they are the dominant force. So now Persia is ruling this whole region of the world, and Darius and Cyrus are 2 of their kings. Most believe Darius was the ruler of a region, and Cyrus was the ruler of the Persian kingdom. It says that Darius has 3 rulers, and one of them is Daniel. Are you guys hanging with me? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, you came to study the Bible, so we're studying the Bible today. Okay. There we go, just making sure you're with me still. Verse 3. Now Daniel, listen to this, so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities. I love these adjectives. That the king planned him to set him over the whole kingdom. So his exceptional qualities are so set apart from everyone else that though he's already one of the 3 most powerful men in the land, they're considering him, making him the most powerful man in the land. At this, the administrators, satraps, tried to find ground, so the others are jealous of Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Do you realize that the number 1 sphere with propensity towards dishonesty is government? Number 1. The propensity means they all have different weaknesses. Where's the propensity for greed? It's in the sphere of business and economics. It's the marketplace, right? But in government, the propensity, the number 1 propensity is dishonesty. It's manipulation. It's all that goes on behind the scenes to leverage political power. It's why the very word political has become negative. It's because of what it connotates, dishonesty, right? So they are looking at his political office, his governmental role, and they go, we can't find anything wrong with this man. Come on, guys. No, come on. Zone in for a minute. Come back from whatever happy place you were just in for a moment. And come back to the tent for a moment. What would it be like if the world looked at a generation of believers and they go, yes, immature, yes, insecure at times, but we can't find anything wrong with their integrity. Right? Now, I'm not saying perfect. We get it. Immature at times, insecure at times, right? But that's different than having an integrity that the world can look at and go, there are no cracks in this person's foundation. This is not a spiritual gift. This is not impossible. This was lived before the new covenant by a man named Daniel who did not have access to what you have access to and I have access to. He could have had the exterior movement of the Spirit on his life, but he did not have the indwelling life of the Spirit inside of him the way that you and I do because of the new covenant. He did not know and have the story and the real moment and the atonement and the propitiation of the cross in his life that we have in our lives. He did not have the New Testament that became life to his bones as he read the teachings in the life of Jesus. This is a man of the old covenant whose integrity had no cracks. And they looked at him and they go, we can find nothing wrong with him. So they go, we're going to have to try and find something else. I just want to tell you, it's what I'm giving you faith for right now. This is possible. I'm not talking about perfection. And I'm not talking about not having immaturities. And I'm not talking about not having insecurities. But I am talking about it is possible to live a life full of integrity. It is absolutely possible. And I just think a whole generation of times we've disqualified ourselves. Let me tell you, your past has no bearing on your future from the moment that you are covered in the blood of Jesus. Okay? So a past of broken integrity does not dictate a future of broken integrity. Or the cross was a waste. Okay? The blood of Jesus cleanses us. It's that we're a new creation. And I want to say this, integrity is not a spiritual gift. It's not a supernatural power. Are you ready for this, guys? Are you ready for the most profound statement I'm going to say all day? Integrity is a choice. Come on. Yeah. Are you with me this morning? Yeah. Are you really with me? Integrity is a choice. And you don't have to make it alone. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead lives inside of us with the power to choose integrity, to choose character, to choose godliness, to run from sin, and to run into an excellent lifestyle. Guys, it's possible. I was talking with Joy Dawson at the beginning of this year, and I've said this a lot of times. You may have heard me say it, and she was talking about unbelief, and she said to me, Andy, the greatest unbelief that I've ever encountered in the church, she's 92 years old. She's encountered a few things. And she says, isn't it interesting that the greatest unbelief in the church is that the church will not believe that we can actually live like Jesus? She goes, it's the biggest. She goes, I've more unbelief on that than the supernatural, than believing for revival, than believing for reformation. She goes, the number one area of unbelief that I've encountered in the church is, she goes, people will fight me tooth and nail, arguing with me that it is not possible to live like Jesus. Wow. Jesus didn't come to model radical Christianity, he came to model normal Christianity. And obviously there was a godness to his nature that we will never transcend. We cannot transcend the line of his divinity. But he was also fully human. And he empowers us through the power of the Holy Spirit to actually live fully human like Jesus. And Daniel gives us faith in the Old Covenant that it's possible. So here we are. They couldn't find anything wrong with him. At this, the administrators, satraps, they tried to find ground. Sorry, I just read that. Listen to this. Because they could find no corruption in him. That's the sentence right there. Oh, maybe sad of our generation. They could find no corruption in them. Yeah, he was a little immature, and he was a little insecure, and he was a little weird, but we could find no corruption in him. We could find no deceit in him. We could find no hypocrisy in him. We find no corruption. Listen to this, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. That's our being on time speech this morning, right there. Someone asked me in a dating forum, which I love doing. It's my favorite. One of my favorite things to talk about is marriage and dating and relationship. They're like, what would you say to, if you're really interested in a guy, but you really need to know if he was the right dude, what would you say? Where would you tell him to go or look, or how did you find out? And I thought I needed an answer. I didn't have one right off the top of my head, and I thought, you know what? Go and observe them at work duties. And first of all, see if they showed up on time, and then see if they're a hard worker. Because that would be a sign that they'll be a hard worker to work for your heart the rest of your married life. And this was Daniel. They looked at his life and they go, there's no corruption in him. It is the way that he lives his life, the way that he works. There's no corruption. He's walking in excellence, right? And they were stunned by it. I think this is going to mark a whole generation. I think that's who's in this tent. Finally, these men said, we will never find, listen to this, they literally exhausted themselves. Oh, that the world would be exhausted in finding hypocrisy in us. Exhausted. They go, I searched every corner, I couldn't find it. All I could find was a past, but everything's changed when they met this guy named Jesus, and I couldn't find anything after that. Right? They were exhausted in their search for corruption. And they said, we'll never find anything against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with this law of his God. So they go to Darius, in case you think Darius is a good guy, he's really not. They go and they go, hey, here's the idea, I'm going to summarize it. We think you're the only guy who should be worshipped in the kingdom for 30 days. He's like, that's a great idea. I love you guys. This is why I hired you. And they go, so for 30 days we're going to pass an edict that you're the only one who can be worshipped. They did this so that they could capture Daniel because it was known by everyone that Daniel worshipped the one true God. The only way they knew they could catch him is if it was in a law pertaining to the worship of his God. Isn't it amazing that his habits were that well known by the world around him?
Wow, come on.
He wasn't living in a closet, worshiping his God out of fear in the darkness around him. They all knew his love for the one true God, and they were all familiar with his worship and prayer habits. And it was the only way they knew they could catch him. Yeah, question. Apparently, he didn't think about it, or his ego was bigger than his judgment. Which I think if he was okay with the law to be worshipped for 30 days, I would say he was pretty blinded by his ego. So I don't know what he knew about Daniel or how much he knew about his life, but at this point, he's certainly not thinking about it. So it says, King Darius puts the decree in writing. Verse 10, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, I love this. So he learns, I don't know, it was either went out and they shouted the law or they would put up, bulletins and you could read the law. But somehow he finds out about it. It's been published. What does it say? He went home to his upstairs room, not downstairs, upstairs, where the windows were open, not closed, didn't close them, opened them, open windows, upstairs, open windows. Towards Jerusalem, 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done since his youth. Wow! Literally 80 years old, 66 years. The kingdom knows Daniel's patterns. Now, if he's 30 and he's been doing this since his youth, good job. He's 40, also good job. But he's 80. And for 66 years, in a demonic, dark nation, as one of a very few remnant of total believers in the nation, 3 times a day, window open towards Jerusalem, on his knees, crying out to his God. Since his youth. And don't you love this? Come on, guys, don't you love this? He literally hears about the law. He's like, interesting. I might die today. Goes home. Come on. He wasn't just like, oh, maybe the Lord will blind everyone. No. He knows what he's doing. He's 80 years old and thinks, hey, it's a good day as any to meet my Savior. Reads the law, goes upstairs, not downstairs, upstairs, not in a closet, open window, not a closed window, sealing his death warrant, fully knowing that he will die for what he's about to do. Wow. Fully knowing. He reads the law, and he goes to prayer. Yeah. Opens the window, gets down on his knees 3 times that day as he had done since his youth, crying out to God, facing Jerusalem. That God would restore his place of worship, his people, his kingdom, in the place of Israel. Wild. Wild. Close my Bible? I wouldn't do that. Let's keep going. You guys know the story. This is Daniel, though. In his 80s. Chapter 6. It says they find him. They find him right where he is. And it says in verse 19. You guys know they throw him into the lion's den. Verse 19, the first light of the dawn, the king got up, hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. It says the king didn't sleep all night. He loved Daniel so much, right? Remember that part of the story? He can't sleep. He's in anguish over his own stupid decision. He runs to the lion's den in the morning, rolls a stone away, and says, Daniel, listen, what does he say? Remember, he's the one who wants to be worshipped for 30 days. Servant of the living God. Oh, capital G. Has your God, capital G, whom you serve continually, may it be said of us in our 80s, continually. May continually be the adjective in our latter years of life that spoke about our history in God. Continually. Has he been able to rescue you from the lion's den? Now, if everything's not ridiculous up to this point, this might be one of the most ridiculous things Daniel does. If there was ever a time to get a little bit frustrated, this was it. If there was ever a time to lash out a little bit, this was that moment. You're 80 years old, night with lions in a cave. You're 80 years old and you are dropped into a lion's den because of an egotistical idiot king who's your friend and has placed you as one of the top 3 leaders in the nation. If ever there was time, and you got to know, when Daniel drops in that lion's den, he doesn't know those lions' mouths are shut. And he doesn't know how long they are going to walk around him before they're open. It's not like he probably had a promise as soon as he landed in there, don't worry, they'll be shut the whole time. I think he's literally sitting in the lion's den going, I don't know, they can eat me at any moment, but they're not right now. This could be interesting. All night long, lions walking around him, 80 years old. The king shows up. If there was ever a time to be like, you idiot, I hate you, get down here. Come on, this is real. How, may I ask you, how does Daniel respond? And the first words out of his mouth, may the king live forever. Woo! What? What? The king wanted to be worshipped for 30 days, and it landed the only righteous man in a lion's den. And when that leader shows up the next morning, he's not full of hatred. He's not full of anger. He doesn't have 12 hours of buried offense that's finally going to be unleashed. He's not cursing him. He blesses him. Wow. Wow. What would it be like if a generation could bless the leaders of our nations that are making poor decisions, that are men just weak and broken, but if the church was known for speaking life and blessing and salvation? Come on, if I stood before Kim Jong-un, one of the most unrighteous leaders on the planet, do you want a track record of having prayed for his salvation? Or do I want a track record of just having criticized him, spoken negatively of him, cursed him his whole life? Long live the king. Who is Daniel? May the king live forever. My God, my God, my God. Sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They've not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, Majesty. The king was overjoyed, gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who were falsely accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. Horrible. Verse 25, King Darius, listen to this, guys. Come on, this is crazy. King Darius wrote to all, everyone say all, the nations, say nations, and every language in all the earth. This is the first record of a global letter that was ever written. Darius writes a letter to every nation in every language on the earth. I don't know how the post service worked then, but FedEx had a lot of deliveries to make. I don't know how it worked, but he literally writes a letter to every nation in every language for the whole world, and he says, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he's the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Unbelievable. What's that? This is the end of chapter 6, verse 26, the decree. One chapter. The king goes from wanting to be worshipped for 30 days to writing the first letter in every language known to earth. That there's one God and he has an everlasting dominion. And you never heard of this guy because he lives in my kingdom. His name's Daniel and he serves the one true God. And he goes from a lion's den to the footnote in a global letter about the one true God. Daniel. A man of prayer, a man of understanding, which I would equate to our study and our love for the Word, and a man of integrity, holiness, and righteousness. Dan, did you have a question? Yeah.
What verse is that part in?
Which one? What I just said, the last bit, chapter 6, verses 26 to the end. 26 through 28. Now, real quick, guys, we're at the end of Daniel's life at that point. I wish I was allowed to do the whole week on Daniel because I love Daniel. And what happens is he realized that this year that he was thrown in the lion's den. Are you guys still good? Are you still with me?
Yeah.
Are you sure? Promise me? Okay, the year Daniel is thrown in the lion's den is the same year that Daniel is prompted to intercede based on a 70-year prophecy of the book of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah prophesies that Israel will return from captivity in 70 years. This is around that same time. The same year that he's thrown in the lion's den is the same year that he goes into intercession because he realizes they're living in the prophecy and now is the time. It's the same year of Ezra chapter 1 when another idol-worshiping king named Cyrus wakes up and has been spoken to by the Lord that his slave labor called Israel is God's chosen people, and that Jerusalem, which lies in rubble, is his place of worship. And he not only releases them, but pays for their return. And they are returned from exile under the leadership of Zerubbabel to begin the rebuilding of the temple and the rebuilding of the walls in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. The same year that the enemy tries to destroy the intercessor is the same year that the intercessor is alerted to the 70-year prophecy, is the same year that an idol-worshiping king wakes up in the morning with a revelation that there's one true God and it's the God of Israel, is the same year that he pays for their return from exile, is the same year that they begin the restoration of the place of worship in Jerusalem. All taking place in the end of Daniel chapter 6. And then the rest of Daniel 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 are prophecies and encounters that Daniel has. And this is all I want to highlight. And I just want us to get a little bit messed up by this morning. And then we're going to go after those three things that I said and get a little bit practical. Is in Daniel chapter 9, he has an encounter. And this is all based on some of the things I just told you. And he's in intercession. It's the first year of Darius. He's in intercession because he realizes the prophecy of Jeremiah. This is the beginning of chapter 9. Verse 3, it says, I turned to the Lord God, pleaded with him in prayer and petition and fasting and sackcloth and ashes. This is profound because Daniel doesn't think that just because it's been prophesied that it's necessarily guaranteed. He actually thinks he has a role to play in the divine human partnership. And he looks at that prophecy and goes, it's important that I agree with the prophecy. And he goes into fasting and prayer for a breakthrough that Israel would fulfill the prophecy that's been spoken. The prayer is remarkable. I'm not going to read it to you, but he basically asked that God would hear his prayers, hear his petitions, and he would answer. Verse 20, while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, making my request to the Lord my God for his holy hill, while I was still in prayer, Gabriel. We're told of two archangels in the Bible, Michael and Gabriel. They're big dogs in the angel world. Gabriel shows up in answer to Daniel's prayers. A man in a dark kingdom with nothing but a prophecy and a prayer. Come on. Nothing but a prophecy and a prayer, and Gabriel shows up. And it says, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the earlier vision, he came to me in swift flight about the time of the evening sacrifice. He instructed me and he said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, a word went out. I love this heavenly interplay. A word went out, which I have come to tell you. Are you ready for this? For you are highly esteemed. This statement is one of the most ridiculous statements in the entire Bible, where heaven is pulled back for a moment so that Daniel could feel the emotion that he couldn't see and he couldn't hear, but was the reality in heaven. A man in his 80s living in a kingdom of darkness in total faithfulness and integrity. A prophecy that he believes is true and a prayer and a cry that it would become true. And in the midst of that, Gabriel shows up to this weak man in his latter years, and he goes, hey, just so you know, from the very first moment that you set your heart to prayer, I was sent by heaven. And I was sent to give you understanding. But Daniel, before I even tell you the understanding, there's something you need to know. Heaven knows your name. We speak about you in hushed tones. and you are esteemed by angels and the great cloud of witnesses. And you are esteemed by the Father. And I know you probably don't feel it because you live in an idol-worshiping kingdom. And I know you probably don't feel it because you're looking around at a prophecy that seems unfulfilled. Have you ever felt alone in an unfulfilled prophecy? And he goes, I don't know if you feel it because you're in your 80s and you've been through some battles in your life. But just so you would know how the emotion of heaven and the report of heaven over you, Daniel, is that you are esteemed, which means you are treasured. When you look up the Hebrew word, you are treasured, you are highly valued, you are highly sought after. Before I give you understanding, which, hey, that's good, and we're going to have a transaction here, you need to know there's emotion in heaven every time your name is mentioned. And that your 60 plus years of what seemed to be hidden obedience and obscurity and faithfulness when it seemed no one was cheering you on, we were watching and we were rooting you on. And the emotion in heaven is one of nothing but affection and love and esteem for you and your faithfulness, Daniel. And he goes on to give him revelation, and then one more is the last one in the third year now, chapter 10. This is another encounter. The year Cyrus, king of Persia, revelation was given to Daniel. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing at the bank of the great river, the Tigris, yes, guys, please, let this mess your heart up today. He says, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz, and under his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. Does this description remind you of any other place in Scripture? This is the exact description of Jesus. This reality. Jesus was pulled from heaven before he became a man. Pre-incarnate. In his uncreated state, before he clothed himself with the humility of flesh, is pulled from heaven because of Daniel. And he literally appears to Daniel in his prayers and in his love. And he says, I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. And I heard him speaking, and I listened to him. I fell into a deep sleep, and my face to the ground, and a hand touched me, set me trembling on my hands and knees, and he said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed. Three eyes. He doesn't have pupils. He has torches. Woo. His body is a glowing fire. It's bronze. It's everything. Look at it. They don't even know how to describe it. So we use these gems and these colors and these descriptions because there's no way to describe him in his glory. And Daniel, 66 years of obscure faithfulness and obedience. No one around him righteous. Very few. A remnant in a dark kingdom. 66 years of 3 times a day on his knees in prayer, crying out to God for a breakthrough over Jerusalem. 66 years of no hypocrisy. 66 years of resolving to not compromise. But 66 years where you would have to wake up a few mornings and go, does God even remember I'm out there? Does God even remember his people, Israel? And then Gabriel shows up, and you're just like, that's sort of a big deal. And Gabriel told me that heaven esteemed me, and that was a really big deal. But then Jesus showed up. Come on, guys. And Jesus shows up to Daniel. He says, I have something to tell you before I tell you anything else. You need to know why I came. It wasn't because of how much I can use you. It wasn't because of the revelation I'm about to give you right now. You need to know that you have earned the esteem and the favor of heaven, and that's why I came. Because you are esteemed in my Father's kingdom. Because the angels stand in awe of your faithfulness and your obedience. And I have come to give you revelation and to answer your prayer. But Daniel, you need to know before anything else, you are highly esteemed in heaven. Guys, what would it be if you realized that as sons and daughters of the new covenant, we are esteemed in heaven, and the great cloud of witnesses look on, cheering us on right now, and the Son of God stands at the right hand of the Father, making intercession for us right now. And when he looks at us, he sees his Son. When the Father looks at us, when he looks at us, he sees the glory of the Son. He says literally that we become the very righteousness of God. Do you realize how heaven feels about you? And do you realize how important our choices are in life? And do you realize, guys, I want to give you faith again, because my whole goal this 3 days, and I said it yesterday, was not just that we'd have 3 days, good days together. 20 years down the road, in a difficult season, I want grit to land in your heart, and you remember a moment in a tent where God unleashed it inside of you. 20 years down the road, when you're living in the Middle East, pressing for a breakthrough, maybe seeing it, maybe not having seen it yet. 20 years down the road, when you're living in that town in Europe, or you're living in that community in America, or you're living in that village in Brazil, or you're out in the middle of the Himalayas. 20 years from now, and you look around and go, man, I feel a little forgotten, I feel a little obscure. Are my prayers even doing anything? Am I even accomplishing anything? In the mundane seasons of life, changing diapers, doing life, trying to figure out where the next paycheck's going to come from or the next dollar, is that in those moments, you would remember that life is more than those details, though they're necessary. And that you would remember, as obscure or forgotten as you may feel, you are esteemed in heaven. And heaven is looking down, and the great cloud of witnesses are cheering on our simple obedience. And I look at these men and these women, and I read about them in history, and they felt all the same emotions we feel, and the same emotions Daniel would have felt. But something touched their hearts and lives, and they began to live for a reality greater than what they could see in front of them. Daniel was living for another reality. He was living for another kingdom. He was living for another day. He was living for another age. And what would it look like if the whole generation got so gripped with the revelation of heaven, and you would realize how much the Father loves you? You would realize the celebration in heaven over our hidden obedience and our hidden faithfulness. It would change everything. I think a generation has struggled in their resolve to not compromise because we've not realized how heaven really feels about us. And I think a whole generation can at times make light of our decisions and make light of our choices and go, is it really that big of a deal? And I want to tell you today, it's a really big deal. It's a really big deal. Heaven esteems us in our pursuit of excellence. Heaven esteems us in our pursuit of Him. Heaven esteems us in our pursuit of integrity. Heaven esteems us in our development, our allowing God to shape our character and to shape who we are as people. Heaven esteems us in this process. And what would it look like if a whole generation got gripped with a greater beauty than anything the world could throw at us? Because we were more aware of heaven than earth. And I think, guys, this is a room full of pioneers. This is a room full of pioneer leaders. It really is. Look around this room. Look at the people next to you. You know what's inside each other. Some of you know each other better than others, but you know what's inside of each other. This is a room full of Daniels. This is a room full of Zinzendorfs and Wesleys and Finneys. And this is a room full of Catherine Booths and Amy Carmichaels, and a room full of Mother Teresa's. This is a room full of William J. Seymour's. This is a room full of George Niles. This is a room full of reformers and revivalists. Is it not? Is it not? And what would it be like if today we were to put a stake in our ground from the life of Daniel and we realized how heaven felt about us? And loneliness and obscurity and the potential of giving up could never even knock on our doors because we're living for another reality. We're living for another kingdom. We're living for another day. And guys, heaven is smiling over our simple obedience. When I look at the life of Daniel, I get courage. I get courage again. We all face this stuff. I've never been more overwhelmed my entire life than right now. I celebrate it. I am just completely overwhelmed with everything that's going on. I think my kids do. Yes, it was like, dude, the Senate goes, are you helping with the Bible Reformation? Well, yeah, kind of really, those guys are really carrying the majority of the weight. They go, fire and fragrance, and they go, Dad, you're overwhelmed, aren't you? I'm like, is it that obvious? Do I have stress lines? Like, what's happening here? When I read the life of Daniel, I get courage. I get courage for the day and the hour we're living in. And that what God has done in history, He can do again. And when I look at the life of Daniel, I see a man who is gripped by a spirit of revival. And my prayer for us today is that we would be gripped by a spirit of revival. And that spirit of revival would lead us into the Word. It would lead us into our prayer lives. It would lead us into a life of integrity and righteousness everywhere we go. These three things, I just felt to highlight them to us today. Righteousness, holiness, integrity, character. 2, our prayer lives. Gosh, don't you know the enemy is just an all-out war to end that if anything, we would not have prayer lives, right? And then our life in the Word, which of course is our focus this whole original first 3 months, is the Word of God. And I just feel like as I look at Daniel, I look at these men and women, I look at where we're at right now, is the Lord wants to lead us into these things, but He doesn't want to lead us into them in robotic obedience or religious obligation, right? Or just the sense of that's the right thing to do. He wants to lead us because we know that we are esteemed in heaven. Changes everything. Changes everything. What do you think? I want to hear what you guys are thinking, even as we're talking about this. What time is it? 11:45. Okay. Thoughts, response, anything. What's stirring inside of you as we're talking about this? Yeah.
I felt like this highlighted to me what's my excuse.
What's my excuse?
Yeah, like Daniel didn't even get the privilege and the blessing to know that Jesus died on the cross for him. And he didn't have that revelation in that time, but he still persevered for 80 years.
Yeah.
And I get a little upset because I'm not feeling him right now.
Yes, come on. Yes, what's my excuse? Gosh, that's so real, guys. Can we, everybody, like, just think about this. Can we just make a decision right now not be ruled by our emotions, but to be ruled by truth and the emotions of heaven? Those are the emotions I want to most affect me, right? Just think about how quickly we kind of get spun a little bit. I think God wants to toughen us up a little bit. And we get tough when we realize what heaven thinks and how heaven feels, and when we realize what we've really been given. Daniel was tough. There was something in him, a tenacity. So that is so good. What else? Yeah.
In chapter 10, in verse 12, it says, "Then he continued, 'Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard.'"
Yeah.
Hallelujah. The first day.
Yeah.
So like that whole 66
Right.
years,
Right.
like, he was there the whole time.
100%.
And if we actually believe that in
Yeah.
this room right now, and we believe that the first time that we turned our gaze
Yeah.
to the Father and actually trusted Him, He was there completely.
Yes.
Come on.
Come on.
We believe that.
Come on. Yes. Amen. So good. What else? Yeah.
There's such an invitation to walk in like set apartness,
Yeah.
just to live a life like Jesus,
Yes.
so we can stand out to the world.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
And be be an example of the glory of God to our life.
Yes. 100%. So good. Yeah.
There's like such a need for people like Daniel in the government.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to be like, oh, so you're not going to the nations, you want to stay in the government? Okay, good luck.
Yeah.
But like the fact that he pursued the Lord, and the amount of like people that were impacted by the Lord, like literally in one day he was like, yep, all of you worship his God.
Yeah.
Like to a whole nation.
Yes.
The amount of impact that like young people that are wholeheartedly pursuing Jesus in our government, and like not being like, oh, I can't be here, it's too hard. I need to be around people that love the Lord so I can keep like whatever.
Yeah.
Like sticking to be like, I'm the only person here who's pursuing Jesus, and
Yeah.
like being able to switch like a whole nation.
Yes.
Like that's so needed and so
Yes.
important.
Come on. That's so good. Yes.
What was hitting me was just realizing what kind of unbelief us and I live in right now. That God was giving dreams to kings, and He was supernaturally keeping Daniel and his companions. It just hit me. He's the same God today.
Yes. Yes.
And he's still capable. And he's still capable of change government,
Yeah.
everything.
That's right.
He's capable of all those miracles and more.
That's it.
And he said you will do more, actually.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Same God. Sin's not new on the earth. Have we even considered that God could actually break into leaders' lives that we've written off as just like, man, there's whatever, the Ayatollah, in Iran, Ahmadinejad, Kim Jong-un, Putin, these leaders that we look at that might be rising up, Shu, like these others, have we actually believed that God could move in their lives? We had that same kind of faith that God could actually move the way we see in Nebuchadnezzar's life. That's so good. Faith instead of unbelief. What else? Yeah. Sorry, nice and loud.
Just like a question with what you were going about yesterday. How do you stay how do you endure and stay sociable like for instance Daniel? Even one thing I think a lot of us are called to the nations and are going to have a struggle and some of us our biggest struggle and fight is going to be about a comfortable life. Some of us are called to the rest of life. So how do you stay burning for 66 years or more and also how to not burn out
Yeah.
right now
Yeah. Yes, so good. So the question is, how do you not burn out? And the other part of that is, how do you then sustain? So how do you sustain that zeal that he had in potentially even comfortable lives and comfortable situations? And then in that, how do you keep that from also burning you out? And these are phenomenal questions, and that's exactly what I'm going to hit some of that. That'll be the first question I answer as we jump into the last 20, 30 minutes. But other just responses or thoughts. Yeah. Sorry, you were in the back. You raised your hand. Yeah. Okay, you guys are preferring each other. Incredible people.
I don't know if this wants to do at the end as well, but you mentioned that we want to be ruled.
Sorry, nice and loud, just so everyone can hear.
You said we want to be ruled by the emotion of heaven and truth. I'm someone that I find can be ruled by emotion. If I wake up and I feel rubbish in the morning,
Yeah.
then that can affect my days. And I know the sphere of society I want to go into, there are going to be days where I feel rubbish.
Yeah.
So what can I do to be less ruled by my emotions?
Yes, that's good. We're going to hit that too. It's in the same vein. These are fantastic questions. Yeah.
I think there's a big thing that I think about, especially Daniel's life, in the Puritan now, is that there's so many distractions in our day and age, and so many things that can be idols, and I think that, there's so many choices that God gives us a choice, a will to choose Him, and choosing love or not choosing. And I think it's so much more powerful in the day we live in to actually choose to say no to all those distractions and actually look at Him. And I think for me a big thing of looking at his life is just thinking about not just having a season of life, but actually looking at your whole life being laid down to God and being given up to His purposes and everything. And it just inspires me every time I read Daniel's life and just think about that and think about the day and age I'm living in, all the things that I can set aside and actually set my mind on God, set my mind on heaven, and go after Him. And so I'm just super excited for the next 9 months of just letting a lot of those realities, I think, bring me even deeper.
That's so good. That's really good. Yeah, someone else. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's good. So good. What else? Yeah. 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 Yes. So good. Yes. What else? What's stirring inside you? Yeah. 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 Yes. Yeah. That's so good. That's great. That's an amazing observation. What else? Anything else stirring in you? Yeah.
One last thing, and how he didn't let his surroundings change him.
Yeah.
He was surrounded by so much.
Yeah.
I
can't even like fathom what he saw
Yeah.
on a daily basis.
Yeah.
That may have like just probably scarred me for life.
Yeah.
And that never changed me. And it went back to something I learned back on my GCS. It was be the thermostat, not the thermometer.
Yeah.
Like let your spirit and your faithfulness change other people.
Change the weather.
Yeah.
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 That's so good. That's really good. Awesome. Yeah.
Mine's quite similar.
Yeah.
Every single time I open up the book of Daniel, I'm just so like hit with like the first few verses.
Yeah.
He's just like, I set this standard.
Yes.
And the fact that he's like alone, like he's like one of two in a
Yeah.
country that hates his religion.
Yes.
Yet he sets his standard, and like the atmosphere shifts because of his high standard.
Yes.
And like that's such a leader, and
Come on.
I'm so inspired.
Yes. Amen. So good. Awesome. Okay. Stand up real quick and just stretch out. We're going to go another 20, 30 minutes. It'll be lunchtime. Yeah, just do a little stretch break. Give each other a high five. Tell someone to live like Daniel. And then as soon as you feel like you stretched a little bit, go ahead and grab your seats.
Huh? See, bro.
All right. All right, here we go, guys. Grab your seats. We're going to go another 20, 30 minutes. Okay, here we go. We're going to jump right in, guys. We got about 25 minutes left. All right, you guys got it. Looks like we lost a lot of people. Bathroom break? Yeah. Would take just like reconvene like 3 minutes. Okay. So if you need to use the bathroom, let's do it real quick. And just because so many are gone, let's just get rolling right at 12. So it's 11:56. We'll get started right at 12. You can hang in your seats or run use the bathroom. We got 4 minutes. That way everybody can be here when we start again. Okay, it's 12, guys. You ready to get rolling? Okay, grab your seats. Let's use all of our last few moments to keep going on this. Guys, if you're in the back and you don't mind grabbing a seat, that'd be great. We're going to make sure we end on time today. Awesome, guys in the back, here in the back, grab your seats, please. To maximize all you Integris Daniels, grab your seat. And Danielas. How come no one's ever named their kid Belshazzar? Belteshazzar. That's right. Belt for sword, or Shazar, or Shazzy. Lots of potential. Shazam, lots of great nicknames. Yeah, someone's got to go Belteshazzar on us. Okay, you guys ready? Okay.
Really quick, I just wanted to, felt like I needed to walk out in repentance really quick because I was a few minutes late this morning. And so I really want to apologize to you guys because it's so not honoring of me to walk away. Yeah, thank you so much. And this is really fun. But I want to apologize to you guys as well because it's not honoring of me. Honoring of me to you guys to walk up to anything late, anything that we have tracks or whatever. So I'm sorry. And yeah, I just really want to honor you guys, and I really appreciate your hard work and everything that you guys are doing.
Alexa told me what she was going to do, and that kind of got me because I was 20 minutes late. And even yesterday I was 20 minutes late. I missed even my track time on accident. Anyways, I want to apologize because I didn't feel like it was that important, because I was missing a little bit of worship, But thank you, Alexa, and thank you guys for working with me and being patient. And thank you. Sorry, I'm really nervous. I don't know what to say. I repent as well as shift gears to be on time because I know that this is time
Thank you guys. Thank you. Whoa. Oh.
Me too. So I'm sorry.
All right, if you want to repent, stand up. Here we go. Take care. If you were late, you want to say sorry, Sarah, stand up one time. Guys, thank you. Thank you, Alexa. Thank you for modeling that. And seriously, that's phenomenal. And it's real. It's all of life. It's every area of life, right? That's what we're learning from Daniel. So I'm right when I say this is a room full of Daniels and Danielas. It's just, I'm totally right when I say that because you're proving it. So thank you for caring about the little things. Thank you for caring about the small things. Thank you for walking in integrity. Heaven esteems integrity in the small. It really does. Okay, we're going to hit three things briefly. And I want to we're going to shift gears and be highly practical and hopefully hit some of your questions you guys have as well. I thought the first question was phenomenal, which essentially said, how do you both sustain zeal and also not walk into burnout? And I think sustaining zeal is really what I'm hoping we get from today, is that we would be gripped with a spirit of awakening, a spirit of revival. And there's a practical, there's a spiritual side to it. The spiritual side to it is the component of faith. And I don't know how else to say it, but you know it when you have it. And you know what I mean when I say that, right? In other words, you all look back, like, there aren't pretty words to put to it, but you know when you're gripped, don't you? So it's a matter of that gripping being sustained in our lives. Not that we're deciding we're going to live by emotions, we're living by truth. The truth is I'm gripped with the spirit of revival. Sometimes I feel it, but the truth is I'm gripped by it. And it manifests in my life and actions and my thinking and my speech, right? But the truth is I've been apprehended and I've been gripped that I cannot go back, I cannot cross the line. I will never apologize for the belief that God can revive and reform. I will never apologize for the belief that God can change any king, any nation, any village, any region in the world. There's this gripping that occurs in our hearts. We've all touched it, we've all felt it, we've all tasted it, and we cultivate that by the three things that I'm going to hit tonight in our last 20 minutes: prayer, the Word, and integrity, which is holiness, righteousness, character, all summed up into one word I'm going to call integrity. Then the second part of that is, how do you be gripped without that gripping leading to burnout? Right? How do you live a lifestyle of fasting and prayer and 3 times a day and no compromise without that somehow leading to burnout? Now, the only reason we have to ask that question is because we all know people that were burnt out in their lives. But I want to say that in God's heart, zeal and burnout don't even exist on the same planet. So we only have to ask the question because we've observed it, but they're not synonymous. So in other words, we do wrong to equate them. God doesn't equate them or say that one naturally leads to the other. Zeal in God's mind never is the outcome of burnout. And I want to say a couple of things on burnout. Number one, a component of burnout is simply a lack of intimacy. So there's a component of burnout that means I was doing life outside the revelation that I'm highly esteemed by heaven. I want to tell you, when you know you're highly esteemed by heaven, you can work hard and long and not burn out. It's like marriage. I'm 18 years in this year. Next month's our 18 years. My wife is so hot. She is so on fire. She is so remarkable. She literally somehow escaped Eden when Adam fell and Eve, and just snuck out and got birth pre-fall somehow, and post-fall without fall syndrome. And I, 18 years, I am more in love with my wife than I've ever been. We talk about it. That's when you know you can talk about it. You look at each other and go, I don't even have, we'll laugh about it. Like, I don't even know how to say how much I like you. And she's like, I feel the same way. I don't have words for how, and it's not just love, we like each other. There's a growth in love. But I want to tell you, am I burnt out in my marriage, or is the awareness of her love cause high boundaries and hard work in our marriage? So am I afraid of getting burnt out? I don't live with fear of burnout in any category of my life. I don't live with fear of burnout in my life. In my marriage, I am motivated by love. I'm motivated by those brown eyes. I'm motivated by 18 years of history. I'm motivated by 6 kids deep and still in love with each other and God. I'm motivated by our story. I'm motivated by our history. And I'm motivated by her presence in my life. And I don't live with an ounce of fear that in my desire to continue to win and woo her heart, and my desire to continue to live a disciplined life in my marriage. And I love being able to look at my son, who's 14 now, and he is going to at some point in his life have the temptation or be exposed to pornography. And we've had all the conversations. I was not waiting for the world to educate my son. I have educated him. And so we talked about it, but I love being able to look at my son. We had this talk just a few days ago, because he got a phone for the first time. We felt like, it's time to get a phone. So let's go there. You got to go there eventually, right? And so I gave him this big speech, and I said, son, this thing, I want you to know, it's like fire. And it will either destroy you or you will learn to wield its power. And this thing in the right hands is one of the greatest blessings on earth. It can heat whole communities. It can cook food. It can bless. It can release energy and power. But this thing in the wrong hands can destroy thousands of acres of woods, obliterate homes, and demolish entire cities. I go, you got to learn how to use this thing. And then I'll be able to look him in the eyes and go, son, I want to tell you, years ago I disciplined myself that my eyes would be for your mom and your mom only. And I can tell you in 18 years I have never given in to looking at pornography. Your mom is enough for me. And to be able to look him in the eyes and go that my discipline around our marriage has not caused a fear of burnout, or that if I work for it, which I do work for it, I travel a ton. That's often what destroys marriages. Our travel draws us closer. And the privilege of being on the road and choosing righteousness, I'm addicted to it. The privilege of being on the road and never having turned on a TV in a hotel room, I'm addicted to it. The privilege of being away from her and still choosing her, I'm addicted to it. Why do I share all this? Because it's the same in the kingdom of heaven, and it's the same in our relationship with Jesus. My pursuit of him has no fear of burnout. I'm not worried about burning out. The only reasons I would burn out is, one, I lacked intimacy and I forgot heaven highly esteemed me, or two, is I did not put practical, proper boundaries around my life. If I will put those two things in my life, then I don't have to live with the fear of burnout, and I can burn with the flame of zeal my whole life, right? It's possible to be on fire till the day we die without touching burnout and without losing the fire. The two things I would say it takes are this: motivated by love, number one, and practical boundaries in our lives. Real boundaries, practical boundaries. Not doing certain things because it's just simply not worth it, right? Not doing certain things because we care more about the people involved than we care about a momentary flame, right? So I would answer the question of burnout in that burnout never needs to be equated to zeal. Never needs to be in the same sentence. We might burn out. I might burn out, but if I did, it's for two reasons. I lacked intimacy and I forgot that I was motivated by love. Or two, is that I was unwise in the practical boundaries of my life. The practical boundaries involve sleep. They involve good food. They involve health. They involve weekends, Sabbaths, right? They involve, there's hours in the night where the phone gets shut off and the laptop gets shut and you just enjoy your family. Right? There are days in the week where you shut it all off and you just enjoy God and enjoy your family and enjoy the beach, right? It's that practical. It's that there are margins and boundaries in our lives. If those are in place, and if we're motivated by love, I'm convinced we can live as a flaming fire our entire lives and never touch a burn. I'm convinced of it. Totally convinced of it. And in my study, history confirms it. All right. So let's hit three things real quick. The Word. All I want to do is say on the Word is I want to give you a couple thoughts on our approach to the Word. And I want to say two things on it. Number one is that there's a whole element that gets forgotten in regards to the Word, that the Word is like the greatest encounter sitting on our shelves waiting for us 24/7. I'm not waiting for an angelic visitation. I've got one. I'm not waiting for a prophetic word. I've got a whole bunch of them. Is that Byrd pooping on you? It just got your laptop? Hilarious. Look at it. It's determined. It's coming for you. It's coming for you. Nope, it's gone. I'm not waiting for a prophecy. I'm not waiting for an encounter. I'm not waiting for an angelic visitation. I've got one that I wake up to every single day. There's an approach to this that we need to change, which is, I go to places and I travel, and certain cultures love prophecy more than others, love it. And they will literally wait for hours of lines going, please give a prophetic word. And I think there's an element of it that's like hunger, that's cool. And then there's an element of I go, that's a little bit unhealthy. And what I would love to do sometime, and I haven't fully done it yet, is I'd love to line up a whole room and go, every one of you is about to get a life-changing prophecy. I'm going to give you the greatest word of knowledge you've ever had in your life. And then line them all up, and then one by one, read your Bible. 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 Greatest prophecy I could ever give someone. Read your Bible. I'm not waiting for a prophecy. I've got one. I'm not waiting for encouragement. I've got it. I'm not waiting for the next emotional high. I can have it every single day diving into this word. I'm not waiting for an encounter of the Holy Spirit that I feel. I've got an encounter of truth waiting for me every single day. Do I love the feelings? Yes. Do I want the glory to be poured out where we lay on our faces for hours? 1,000,000%, right? 1,000,000%. Do I believe in prophecy? 1,000,000,000%. Right? Do I believe in the spiritual gifts? All the time, every time, all the time, every day. I want it all, but I'm not waiting for it. It's waiting for me. It's waiting for me. And I think we've got to change our approach to the Word to realize, as some of you have heard me say this, if you've been around here for a while, is the only book in all of human history that you will ever read where the author will never die. It's the only book in all of human history ever been written that every time you open it, the author is living, active, present, and waiting to bring revelation of what he meant when he wrote it. No other book will ever be written in all of human history with an author that will never die, or an author that can be ever present. This is the only book. It's why it's the only book. It's why it's different than every other book. It actually has supernatural power. It actually is absolute truth. Everything in this word is truth. And every time we approach it, he is ready and willing to give us understanding, revelation, to touch our hearts, to touch our lives, to change our lives, to help us apply it, to help lead into a life transformation every time. Now, does that mean every time you open it is going to be fireworks? No, I'm not waiting for fireworks. I just want to feed on truth every single day. I actually believe if you take vitamins, that they will help your body. Did I feel really great after I took a vitamin C? No. But did I take another one the next day? Why? Because I fundamentally believe that if I get the vitamin in my body, it will help my body. Why don't we do the same thing with the Word? You know, we're all waiting to feel it. Don't wait to feel it. It's vitamin C. It will help you. Just get it inside of you. It's the greatest vitamin that will ever exist. Don't wait to feel like it feels good. Get it in your body, and I promise you, you'll live longer. I promise you, you'll experience more of the life of the Spirit. It's getting it inside of us over time that leads to transformation. I'm not in a big wrestle every morning over whether I should take the vitamin C. I fundamentally have faith it's good for my body. I fundamentally have faith it's good for every part of who I am. Body, soul, and spirit. So I take the vitamin C. Our approach to the Word. There's a supernatural encounter moment that's waiting. It's an encounter every time we read it. I like to look at it at times and I literally think of this. This thing's a train, and it is stuck on tracks. You cannot veer off the train tracks for a train. It can't turn to the left or the right. It only goes one direction. And this train only goes one place, and it's into the heart of God. There's no left or right. You're never going to go into this and be like, how did I get here? No, it only goes one place. It goes into the heart of God. If read with the right heart and the right intent. Of course people have abused this, but that was with wrong hearts and wrong intent. We don't need to worry about that in this room. I'm telling you, every morning can put this thing in there, and then you can somehow get on it, like somehow get in it, and let this train take you into the heart of God every single day. It only goes in one direction, into his heart. It's a locomotive. It's life-changing. Second part is that not only is this an encounter of his heart waiting for us, but this is truth. And I tell you, my gosh, it's so funny how quickly people want to throw off truth because they feel like it's restrictive. And then they live in perpetual insecurity because you don't know what's right and wrong any longer. And we've got a whole generation running around in perpetual, chronic insecurity because we've thrown off the yoke of truth. Truth was never meant to be restrictive. Truth is life and life abundance. Truth is security. So it's like a parent. What parent in their right mind would be like, kids, you know what? Why don't you just go play in the road today? I know there's this thing out there that playing in the road isn't safe, but that's just their perspective. That's their truth. Who's to say it's our truth? Go play in the highway today. And what kid is going to be walking towards the highway questioning whether their parents are sane? As cars are buzzing by and they're like, my dad told me to play in the road. And that kid has a chronic insecurity. They no longer have trust because the advice they've been given is bad advice because it wasn't based on truth, it was based on opinion. And it doesn't matter how many people believe that opinion, the highway's still a bad place to play. Now that child is in insecurity because you've removed the foundation that there are actually absolute truths. So now you've got a whole generation that doesn't realize the highway's dangerous but is getting run over by it. And they're like, this hurts. Why did my parents tell me it was okay to play here? Boom, another semi-truck. Right? And now they're playing in the highway going, life is really painful. Why didn't anyone tell me that there were boundary lines in life that would actually lead to abundant life? This thing is true. David says in Psalm 16, the boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I will have a delightful inheritance. He saw the Word and goes, if I will stay in the confines of the Word, pleasures forevermore. River of delights, pinnacle of all ecstasies and all life, found within the boundary lines of His Word, the boundary lines of truth. I'm telling you, when we recover this, you know what happens? We get confident. We get confident. Touch the burning stove and it burns you. I know it's profound, right? Sexual immorality leads to brokenness. This is not rocket science. And if we would land on the truth of the Word, a generation would become confident again. Living in the boundary lines of abundant life. This thing was not only meant to be an encounter of His heart, but it is truth to live by. And the more we fall in love with it, the more confident we become as believers. Not so that we can have right opinions. Not so that we can win arguments. We become confident that there is truth, and if we live in it, it will actually produce blessing. It will actually produce life. And when a generation gets invited to that, man, we shatter the insecurity of like, should I touch it? Should I not? Should I play on the highway? Should I not? Is this okay? Is this not? He answers that for us in this in a way that leads to abundant life. So not only is it an encounter, it is also truth. Running out of time here. And there's so much. You know, David made sure that today that we need to end well. That's good. I'm obeying my leader, my co-leader. I love David. Don't you guys love David? I love David. I told you you'd fall in love with this guy. You know, at the beginning of school, What's that noise? Is that a pirate noise? It's a David noise? Why haven't you taught me this noise yet? I told you love this guy. I was like, where has this man been my whole life? We are best friends and have never met before. It's like, you know, brothers from different mothers, and I told you to love him, and I know you do already. So no, I'm more than happy to end on time. Here's what I want to say. Is the Word. Picture it every time as encounter in the revelation of truth. It's not a heavy yoke to throw off. It's an authority to fall in love with. In other words, there's a fear of authority today. I think God wants to give us a love of authority, the authority of Scripture. And when we read this thing, no longer looking at like, oh, what am I going to read and then not be able to do? Instead, we read and go, show me everything I can line my life up with. It changes the whole approach. It's about approach. Approaching it for encounter. Approaching it with a living author. Approaching it ready and excited to live every single element of it. That's the Word. Prayer. So much that can be said with so little time. Let's just pray a lot. How's that sound?
Yes.
You guys just want to pray a lot?
Yes.
How's the night watch last night? Raise your hand if you were night watch. I'm curious. Who was night watch? Wow. So your raised hands prayed for every nation on earth last night. Come on. Hey, did night watch feel a little different after the Zinzendorf story? Did you feel a little bit like a Moravian in the night watches? Yeah, maybe not. You're like, no, I'm still tired. I'm sure the Moravians were tired too. Prayer. My big speech on prayer. Let's just pray a lot. Let's fall in love with prayer. Let's make it a way of life. Let's view our prayer sets on time. Let's dive into the personal place of prayer and the secret place alone. Allow these 9 months to cultivate a discipline of prayer like Daniel did 3 times a day for 66 years. And lastly, I just, we can highlight some of these things even later on at different times. But holiness, righteousness, integrity, all I really want to say on this, because I know it's already in our hearts. All I'm doing is giving language to what's already inside of you guys and what we all just already have decided to live. But all I want to say on this is the small things matter. And let's be a school that declares and lives that the small things matter. What would it be like, guys? And let's just dream now as we end together. What would it be like to be a part of a community that's addicted to the Word? I just mean there are more ways to read and fall in love with God and the Word than we probably have begun to imagine. And can we just saturate our lives in the Word in these next 9 months? I mean, get an audio Bible, get printed Bibles, get a comic book Bible, get it all. Like, just get it all. Let's get the Word in our hearts and let's talk about it joyfully. It's hard to be in environments where you can talk about the word and not always end in arguments, you know what I mean? Let's just jump into fun conversation on the word. And let's focus most of it on the things that have the most life-transforming power. You know, every once in a while you're going to have a little Nephilim discussion, but, you know, the Nephilim is never really going to change your life in the long term. I'm just telling you. Nobody's really going to probably ever figure that one out. And when they do, I don't know if it'll even change their lives. So, you know, let's focus on the things that are really going to lead to life transformation. Let's saturate ourselves in the Word. Number 2, can we just be a praying community? Can we just agree right now to be a praying community? Like let's immerse ourselves in prayer. Night watch, personal lives, corporate times. And then third, can we just make an agreement together as a school that the small things matter? Right? Because sometimes we can live in that integrity, character, righteousness thing, and we can look at it and go, well, at least I'm not doing, you know, fill in the blank. But this is not that kind of people. That's not who's in here. You guys aren't at least I'm not type of people, right? And so we can always find someone to compare ourselves to that's struggling more than we are, but that's not so we can feel better about ourselves, right? We want to be the people that, like Daniel's, resolved themselves towards righteousness and integrity in every area of life. Men, can we just be a group of men that go after integrity like never before?
Yes.
And even like this be a place that every guy gets every breakthrough needed. And then there's time and there's authenticity and sincerity to that. And there's no shame in that. There's no condemnation. And ladies, can you commit this to be a group of ladies that just walk in radical integrity, like radical character? Can we as a school just say, we're going to go after this? We want to live like Daniel. We want to be the John Wesleys of our generation, right? We want to be the Zinzendorfs of our generation. And I don't think it's rocket science. It's simple obedience. It's simple hunger. It's getting gripped with that spirit of revival. It's a love for prayer. It's a love for the word. It's a love for integrity. So Jesus, bless revival and reformation. Bless this amazing squad. God, catch us up in that spirit of revival today. Fill us with joy as we go to lunch. Fill us with joy as we head to a prayer set, I think, this afternoon. Fill us with joy as we head into Ironman this weekend. And just bless this community. I'm so grateful for the fire and the zeal, the faithfulness and the integrity that's in this room. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Awesome. Let's just celebrate what God's doing in our hearts. Celebrate each other.
We've been so privileged to have different speakers come through. I think one of the best ways to actually honor the speaker is actually just to pray for God and what He's got for them next. So Andy, just before you go, we just absolutely love you. We love your moments with us as a class. And we actually love the ones you're gone even more because we're so stoked with what God's leading you into. So can you give us a couple things you're heading to next? Can we just rally behind Him, pray for Him, His family, and just as He's blessed us and just imparted to us this week, can we as a group like to pray for blessing and impartation back to Him as well? So you guys, so next couple of things, maybe the next couple of weeks or key things?
I fly out on Sunday night and go to meet with Steve Douglas with crew to talk about what it would look like to really run together with Campus Crusade and Ascend. Then I head to Colorado Springs to meet with Every Home for Christ for the same. And then I head to Dallas for a couple days. Come on, Dallas. And I'm going to spend some time with some leaders there. We'll be with Matt Chandler for dinner, and we're going to talk as well about what it looks like to partner together. Just these streams coming together. And then there's the big Dallas Speedway gathering, and they're expecting 200,000 people. And so Todd and I have been asked to share with about 15, 20 minutes just to call them to the lost and to the nations and at the Speedway. And then we'll be with Francis as well, and we're going to go down and meet with Jimmy Siebert of the Antioch Movement in church, which is just so encouraging. So I think as I'm looking at all that, I'm not saying any of that so that we think that's cool. I'm not. It just means a lot of planes. But my son Asher's coming with me, so it's going to be amazing. And here's my prayers. What I'm getting to is I just believe we're heading into unprecedented unity as the body of Christ across the streams more than ever before. And so can we just pray corporately all together for an unprecedented unity, which means equal sacrifice. It's equal sacrifice for a common cause. That's the kind of unity we're looking for, believing for. So pray for favor on these meetings, that people just throw in and go, we do anything for the Great Commission, right? This isn't about one organization, one name. It's really about the whole body of Christ rising up right now. So can we pray that together?
Yeah, let's jump on our feet and let's pray for that.